Classical music has a legacy of men who are writing music, and so we're having to create space for women's voices in the field. It's very, it's a not equal field, so about under 10% is women composers whose work are getting programmed, whose works are getting seen. And oftentimes they're seen on evenings where it's all women together, so it's still in a ghetto. So through hard work of people like Beth Morrison and other organizations who really are championing the work of women in a bigger context, the work is getting heard more. I worry about long term. I worry it's a phase, and I hope that there are ways long term to really integrate the music field, because right now it's still pretty segregated.
I think when you're looking at any minority group's role in the arts, the reason that there's women's lit class in colleges or things like that is because generally those works have been ignored by the canon, so you have to find other ways to focus on them. And that goes for queer literature, African American literature, anything like that. But that doesn't mean that the work in itself is different by definition than other work. It's just historically been excluded, so we have to find new ways to spotlight it. But at its heart, I don't think that you can put division between this is a woman's story, this is a man's story, etc. But the spotlight we tend to lend to them is different. So now I think there's a bigger push to look for women's stories because they've been ignored in the past. I think representation is such a crucial part of how societies move forward, how dialogues move forward. The more that, for anyone, any child growing up, the more that they can see themselves involved in an art form, in a profession, in something that they look up to, the more that it can feel possible for them, and you really can't undermine how valuable that is, that if you don't see yourself there, it's hard to imagine it. Growing up, I couldn't see anyone's career that I was in love with. I didn't know a lot of female directors, I definitely didn't know a lot of female playwrights, and then through education, you find your heroes and you find people you admire, but I think that representation is so crucial to getting young people involved. I am of the point of view that a work does not have to have a triumphant ending for a character to be admirable. You can respect a character and watch them make terrible decisions. So I'm not here to demonize Carmen. I'm not here to demonize the women in classical opera who have gone crazy, who have made mistakes, I'm not interested in that. But what I am interested in is showing a new slice of that narrative where instead of the arc being a woman, she makes the mistake and then she is murdered for it, or a woman and her life and then she is raped and that's the end of the story, it's a downfall. That's not how lives work, that's not how stories work, that's not how any of those events work. I'm much more interested in looking at it from a different frame of okay, so you go crazy, that's fine, that happens to people, or you're assaulted, that happens to people, and they go on with their lives, or they try to. So I'm interested in looking at that from a different perspective and seeing what happens after those things. How does that affect someone? How does that relate to someone in the real world? So the attempt, and what I'm really excited about with Prism, is I think Lumi and Bibi are not characters going through things that other characters in operas don't go through, but we're focusing on them in a very different way, and we're looking at, okay, then what? How do you move on in your life? How do you try to survive? How do you try to heal? How do you try to love someone? How do you try to protect someone? All the things that happen after a woman's life or anyone's life is interrupted with trauma.